welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts, and give this video a like as well. So this is for the prize Pest, and what's this? I hear a knock. Oh, looks like I won the grand prize. Oh, the grand prize is Matt Hunter.
It's me, Buster! Hoo-hoo! Hoo-hoo!
Yay. Oh, well, I'll have to have this prize Pest recording with me, I guess. But just to go through a few bits of information, so as mentioned, this is the prize Pest, released on the 22nd of December 1951. It had a Blue Ribbon reissue sometime in 1960. It's the 637th in the series, and it's directed by Bob McKimson. You can find this on the Looney Tunes Superstars Daffy DVD set. Thankfully, it's one that's not cropped, so you're getting a decent picture there. There is a HD version out there, but at the time of this recording, it's not really available, so hopefully it'll come on disc some point. Cough, collector's choice. Cough, something in my throat there,
Haven't heard of that one before or anything.
Yeah. It's not a joke I've used in this show at all, but in case you haven't seen this one, as it is under copyright, I can't show you the full thing on YouTube, but essentially, Porky is listening to the radio where he finds out if he hears a knock on the door, he's won a grand prize. So he hears a knock on the door, and that prize is, well, Daffy, who just causes all sorts of mischief. And I gotta say, yeah, the premise is very, very fun.
Yeah, you don't need any more exposition than that. Porky's listening to the radio, he's listening to a game show. The radio actually talks back to him, and then all of a sudden, the same voice he hears on the radio shows up at his door and hands him a package off screen, and he opens the package, and it's Daffy Duck. What more explanation do you need? It's simple enough.
Exactly.
It doesn't need too much explanation. It's like, okay, here we go. And you have to think, too, the whole premise with the radio, it's almost like everything old is new again. Like, kids today are not going to recognize the radio as a staple of the household or if it's something people listen to. But at the same time, the idea of the radio with the announcer, voiced by Mel Blanc, talking back to Porky, that's not all that different from smart speakers that we have today. A lot of people listen to podcasts and things like that on smart speakers that do talk back to you. So, hey, it's a reference that's dated but now relevant again.
Exactly right. And, in terms of trivia, I mean, there really isn't too much here, but I do want to point out something very important in regards to the radio, now that you mentioned it, and that's the whole game show craze. It really was a huge thing at the time in the 40s and, into the 50s as well. And it was basically on the radio. And yeah, it was really huge. And then, of course, that translated to huge viewership when it came to television, because a lot of the game shows would end up migrating over, and you could see the picture. So, and of course, the radio was more or less dying out, except for, of course, for music in the 50s. But yeah, this was definitely a parody in reference to all the game show craze at the time.
Yeah, well, and if you look at the classic Christmas movie, A Christmas Story, that was made in the 80s, set in the 40s, there's that whole running thing with the kid Ralphie and his brother listening to the Little Orphan Annie radio show. And like every episode, they give a clue to this overarching mystery that they're supposed to solve for a prize. And they finally do, and they send away in the mail for a decoder ring and all this kind of stuff. And at the very end, it's just an ad for their sponsor, drink more Ovaltine. But the radio was before television. That was the family's home entertainment. People listen to the radio.
Exactly. Now, I do have a question for you, because I didn't quite catch this particular reference, and you do have the answer for it, because we discussed it beforehand, of course. So, I saw that sign that says dumb waiter, and I gotta ask, what is that referring to? Because a lot of people may not know that today.
Okay, so a dumbwaiter was basically a little box on a pulley to transport of food and whatever else the servants in older houses needed to transport between floors. You would have a 2 or 3 story house with a basement, and instead of disturbing the family or the party guests or whatever to get a meal or equipment that they needed from floor to floor, they would use this box on a pulley and lift it up and with a stop on each floor so that they could transport stuff without having to climb the stairs and disturb people. And it was called a dumbwaiter. I don't know exactly why, but that's what it was called. And it's referenced in a lot of old cartoons that are set in old houses.
And yeah, it's something it might have existed here. I just have not seen anything referred to as dumbwaiter. So it's possible that in some of the really old houses around here, they might have had something similar, but I don't never heard that name before. So here it's literally spelled out, dumb waiter.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you're the cook in the kitchen and there's a servant in the basement and there's something in the basement that the cook needs in the kitchen that's upstairs, the guy in the basement can lift the sack of potatoes or the bottle of syrup or whatever they need or box of flour or whatever, lift it up the dumbwaiter, and there it is in the kitchen. They just grab it and go.
That's it. As mentioned, yeah, the premise in this one is very thin, but as you say, it doesn't matter. It's just an excuse to get these two characters together where Porky's more or less the straight man and Daffy's the wacky
Yeah.
character, and we go to town. Yeah, Daffy really drives him wild.
Yeah, and Daffy has this routine where he plays like he has a split personality. He's got a set of fake fangs that he puts in his mouth, and he pretends to be this split personality that, you make him mad and he'll scare the crap out of you. It's a funny premise.
I turn into a hideous monster. Get the idea, Buster?
It's very, very simple. In fact, they used a bit of it in the compilation movie Daffy Duck's Quackbusters, where Daffy is testing Porky Pig to see if he's fit to work for a ghost busting agency. But in this one, it's just, the whole cartoon itself, it's Daffy just heckling Porky almost for no reason. But you'll notice just this animation is brilliant. And there is one thing that we need to point out, that Devin Baxter has a breakdown video of it where he illustrates exactly which animator did what. One I want to point out is Phil DeLara. He was one of McKimson's main animators at the time. And this model that you see in the cartoon for Daffy Duck was the same one that he wrote and drew in the Dell Western comic books around the same time. And if you like this cartoon, you'll love those stories because they are very much like this. Usually it's Elmer Fudd is the antagonist as opposed to Porky, because Porky kind of played a different role in those comics, but they're brilliant. And when he used this style, it's beautifully drawn.
Oh, exactly right. And speaking of the whole Jekyll and Mr. Hyde bit, I'm fairly certain that when Daffy starts that whole shtick off, I believe he's actually quoting from the movie. I think the 1941 movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I'm pretty sure that's where it's coming from, or at least it's a very close parody of it anyway. Um,
Right. Well, and how many cartoons, both Warner Brothers and all the others, did parodies of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde scenario? How many of them? Like countless. I mean, I can think of Tom and Jerry, Bugs Bunny, Sylvester and Tweety. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I think there was even a Disney cartoon that did it, maybe with Pluto. I'm trying to think where the Pluto has a split personality or something. It's been done.
you were mentioning the comics. We actually see a comic in this one, and who is it? We see Bugs' cameo on the comic book, and at this time, Bugs had, of course, a great career in the shorts, but also in the comic books, and even in the comic strips, too. It was another character seemingly altogether. There was just no consistency.
Right, but a lot of the people, particularly in the McKimson unit, I mean, Charles McKimson, Robert's brother, also worked a lot with the Western Dell comics at the time. They would do that at night, after working all day at the cartoon studio. They would do that for supplemental income, and pretty much all the Hollywood animators did that. So, people say, oh, the comics were so much different from the cartoons. Part of the reason those Daffy and Elmer stories are so much like this cartoon is because, well, the same guys that worked on them did that. So,
No, exactly right. But boy, oh boy, as we pointed out already, the cartoon's funny because all these references and whatnot, mean nothing if the cartoon just isn't good, and thankfully it is. And of course, a lot of the gags in here, and even just some of the wordplay, are like
It's the duck, fat stuff.
fat stuff.
yeah, nice fat butterball.
Hello, baby. Nice, fat, little butterball. Oh, and now stop.
He's like, "Hello, baby," like that whole
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Charles Boyer, Pepe Le Pew, French romantic thing that Mel Blanc did. And one of my favorite scenes in this one that just never fails to make me laugh is when Daffy Duck poses as a telephone. And, Porky's like, I better call and warn the authorities. And Daffy takes the place of his telephone. And Porky isn't looking, he doesn't notice. And so he's definitely using Daffy as a phone. And Daffy's just there waiting for him to notice. That is just brilliant. That is funny.
Oh yeah, definitely. And so some of the wordplay, the whole convertible coupe scene.
Oh, is it a convertible coupe? Because I'm a convertible duck. See, Chubby? Now you stop that, you crazy darn duck.
I thought that was a pretty nice touch. It's
Yes.
just and it's just that the wordplay that rivals actually what Maltese was doing with Jones. I would say some of this stuff in this short, which is pretty good.
Was this Ted Pierce?
I believe
Was it
so.
Ted Pierce? Yeah, it's a Ted Pierce story. So
Yeah, and Ted Pierce can be quite hit or miss at times. Like sometimes he'll come up with something that's really fantastic, and other times average, and sometimes even bad. If we're being honest,
but occasionally he would hit a home run like this one.
Exactly.
And we got to talk about the lineup of animators now that I'm looking at the title card, and that's just the ones credited: Rod Scribner, Phil DeLara, Emery Hawkins, and Charles McKimson. Like, that's a murderer's row of animators right there. That is just... And again, if you go and you look at Devin Baxter's video that highlights who did what, I encourage you to look that up. It's interesting, but you can totally see it. Hawkins did a lot of stuff before working with McKimson. He worked on Art Davis's short-lived unit. And speaking of the collector's choice Blu-ray, there's some examples of his work on there with Daffy. You can see in this cartoon is very similar. And then, of course, you've got Rod Scribner, who was toned down a lot from when he used to work with Bob Clampett, but you can still see things that he adds to Daffy in this cartoon, and even Porky in a couple of scenes. It's great animation.
And now my good friend Luke Perkins wanted to add his 2 cents to this short, so take it away, Luke.
Yeah, so this cartoon is really interesting for me to talk about because I really like this cartoon. I really do. But there isn't really much to write home about. It's a pretty standard Robert McKimson cartoon, and honestly, there's nothing wrong with that in my opinion. I guess the reason why I wanted to talk about this cartoon is that, aside of the fact that this was another cartoon I found out about through the Baxter's Breakdowns articles from Cartoon Research, there were some interesting details I noticed when rewatching this cartoon again for this video. Now, first off, this and maybe a few other cartoons that McKimson directed around this period shows an interesting change in terms of animation direction for his cartoons. Up to this point, McKimson's animation direction was sort of like Bob Clampett, where, everybody is animated loosely and acting very theatrical, pushing everyone around and yelling at each other and at the audience, throwing their hands around, etc. But at the same time, the animation had a great sense of solidity and weight, and it's shockingly believable in a way. That, and it's also helped by the amazing animators who came and went to McKimson's unit throughout the early years until now, like Manny Gould, Charles McKimson, Emery Hawkins, Bill Melendez, Phil DeLara, Rod Scribner, and others. It's also proving that even before he became a director, Robert McKimson was an amazing animator with a strong sense of draftsmanship. Some of his drawings, if you can find them, are amazing, and it's no wonder that Termite Terrace tried attempting to hire him as a director a few times before he sort of caved in 1946. But now by this point, there's a subtle change of pace in the animation direction, where the animators for this one, like Emery Hawkins and even Rod Scribner, are slowly following the character layouts a bit more, who, at the time, the character layouts were usually done by the director. And even though there's some great looseness on there, it's subtly toned down a bit and even a little stiffer at some places, even though the animation for the most part in this cartoon is really good. Something going on around that time too was where the budgets were about to slowly but surely go down, but I feel like that part is a story for another day. Not to mention that if you watch this cartoon, you might notice an early little animation trait that McKimson loved to put in his cartoons post-shutdown era. It's called the McKimson Squint. Great title, huh? So, the McKimson Squint is basically characters drawn with their eyes half shut, but yet drawn in a way that looks like the character is squinting, either looking like something suspicious is going on, or acting a bit like an intellectual. If you watch Daffy in the short, especially in some close-ups animated by Charles McKimson, one of them being where Daffy goes, "Because I'm a split personality," Daffy's expressions resemble the McKimson squint, though admittedly an early version. This might be one of the first times I've seen that in McKimson shorts around this period, because I saw a McKimson short recently called Early Tibet, and admittedly there's some squints here and there, but this might be the first time where it's extremely noticeable, and it would get even more noticeable in the post-shutdown era, which we'll get to in maybe a long while. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up was some interesting pieces here and there on Carl Stalling's music score for this cartoon, which is really good. I noticed upon rewatch how the opening theme transitions to the actual cartoon in an interesting way. If you watched a lot of these cartoons and know about the opening titles, is that the title music would either end with a crescendo or a big bang, or a decrescendo by having a little excerpt be played by a flute or a marimba. In here, the use of the marimba ends the title card and begins the cartoon.
This is the What's the Name?
Because the marimba plays the NBC radio theme. You know, NBC. And it actually transitions to Porky listening to a game show on the radio. It's pretty clever. I also noticed a piece that Stalling didn't use that much, and it's in the scene where Daffy is explaining to Porky about how he's a split personality and how he can sometimes be nice, and he starts cuddling Porky's head and talks like Charles Boyer, for example, and the music that's playing in this scene is a French tune called La Vie en Rose.
Hello, baby. Nice, fat, little butterball. Oh, and now stop.
La Vie en Rose is a classic French song written by, and I'm probably going to get their pronouncings wrong, so I apologize, written by Louis Guy and Edith Piaf, who also sang the song as well in 1945. At first, Piaf's peers didn't think the song would be a hit, and it seemed weaker than her other stuff. But the song actually became really successful and was covered by well-known crooners, singers, and musicians like Louis Armstrong, Bing Crosby, Grace Jones, and others. But the reason why I bring that song up is for two reasons. When I rewatched the cartoon and that scene popped up, I instantly got reminded of the scene in the 1954 Billy Wilder classic Sabrina, starring Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart, in which Audrey does a beautiful take on that song, and even in the music score by Frederic Hollander, he does some arrangements of that song throughout the score of the movie. So definitely check the movie out if you can after this video. It's actually available on YouTube and Paramount Plus. And two, I also remember a sound-alike version of the song that Scott Bradley composed for the animated MGM shorts in the mid-50s in certain cartoons taking place in France. But I remember Scott's take on La Vie en Rose being on the 1956 Tom and Jerry CinemaScope cartoon, Tom and Chérie. If you watch that cartoon and listen closely to certain scenes where Jerry is writing love letters to his girlfriend, you'll hear a version of La Vie en Rose that almost sounds like a parody of that song. I even remember hearing that version in the Tom and Jerry dream sequence for the 1953 Esther Williams musical Dangerous When Wet. And that's pretty much it. As for the prize Pest overall, it's a standard cartoon and there isn't much to write home about, but it's a pretty good McKimson cartoon with some interesting details if you watch carefully, and it's a cartoon I can sometimes go back into when I'm in the right mood. I think I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. Well, I'll catch up with you later.
I do have to ask though, like, why is there a prize for knowing your name? And I get this is
Right.
a parody thing, and that's obviously what they were going through here. But it's just hilarious. Just what is your
It's
name?
probably a commentary on just how stupid some of those shows were. I imagine it was kind of like with TV shows that we have now, like the talent shows, the American Idols and Masked Singer and all that kind of stuff. It's like, how lowest common denominator can you get?
Exactly.
Do you know your own name?
Exactly. But the best bit of animation in this short, I have to point out, is when Daffy's freaking out when he actually sees Porky's monster, which I love that design, by the way. It's a depressing monster, but that bit of animation of Daffy freaking out is definitely the highlight of this short. Not to say the rest is bad, but that one just stood out for me. It was great.
Right, right. I think that is Scribner. And if it's not, obviously the video that Devin did will correct me on that. But just Daffy freaking out and then freezing and then falling apart.
Yes.
That's just a great take. And then, of course, Porky then as kind of the punchline, he looks in the mirror and he is terrifying and he scares himself. It's just a funny cartoon. It's just these two characters that interact so well, and you can't help but laugh. It's funny.
Exactly.
I just think it's a great cartoon. I think it's just keep it simple, keep it simple, and you have two very strong characters, and you have Mel Blanc, and you have a winner. It's great.
So this one for me, I'm just trying to think of a good score. I think 8.5. Maybe, it's not 8.5 or 9, something along those lines. It's not quite a classic per se, but it's a solid short that makes me laugh from start to finish. So
I'd say a solid 9.
Yeah.
It's a great one.
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely love this one. And look at this. We finished 1951. Woohoo! It's done. Yeah, so soon, of course, as always, you'll see a year in review video where I go through all the shorts that have been reviewed. And of course, next up, 1952 with more Wile E. Coyote, finally, and a few other bits and pieces in there that are absolute classics. Can't wait.
Absolutely, yeah. Wile E. Coyote, super genius.
Exactly. But that'll do it for this review. Until next time, take care.
What a scaredy cat. Anybody who'd be scared of a masquerade costume is a craven little coward. So I'm a craven little coward.